In comparison with most men, few things touch me, or, to put it better, hold me, for it is right that things should touch us, provided they do not possess us. I take great care to augment by study and reasoning this privilege of insensibility, which is naturally well advanced in me. I espouse, and in consequence grow passionate about few things. My sight is clear, but I fix it on a few objects. My sensitivity is delicate and tender, but my perception and application are hard and deft. I do not engage myself easily. As much as I can, I employ myself entirely upon myself, and even in that subject I would still fain bridle my affection and keep it from plunging in too entirely, since this is a subject that I possess at the mercy of others, and over which fortune has more right than I have, so that even in regard to health, which I so esteem, I ought not to desire it and give myself to it so frantically as to find illnesses therefore unbearable. One must moderate oneself between hatred of pain and love of pleasure, and Plato prescribes the middle way of life between the two. But the passions that distract me from myself and attach me elsewhere, those in truth I oppose with all my strength. My opinion is that we must lend ourselves to others and give ourselves only to ourselves. If my will happen to be prone to mortgage and attach itself, I would not last. I am too tender, both by nature and by practice, fleeing affairs and born in idle ease. Ovid. To engage in contested disputes only to see my opponent get the better of me, or to have to turn back red-faced after giving hot pursuit, might well vex me cruelly. If I were to bite off as much as others do, my soul would never have the strength to bear the alarms and emotions that afflict those who embrace so much. It would be put out of joint from the start by this inner agitation. If people have sometimes pushed me into the management of other men's affairs, I have promised to take them in hand, not in lungs and liver, to take them on my shoulders, not incorporate them into me, to be concerned over them, yes, to be impassioned over them, never. I look to them, but I do not brood over them. I have enough to do to order and arrange the domestic pressures that oppress my entrails and veins, without giving myself the trouble of adding extraneous pressures to them. I am enough involved in my essential, proper, and natural affairs without inviting in foreign ones. Those who know how much they owe to themselves and for how many duties they are obliged to themselves find that nature has given them in this a commission full enough and not at all idle. You have quite enough to do at home. Don't go away. Men give themselves for hire. Their faculties are not for them. They are for those whom they enslave themselves. Their tenants are at home inside, not they. This common humor I do not like. We must husband the freedom of our soul and mortgage it only on the right occasions, which are in very small number, if we judge sanely. See the people who have been taught to let themselves be seized and carried away. They do so everywhere, in little things as in big, in what does not touch them as in what does. They push in indiscriminately wherever there is business and involvement, and are without life when they are without tumultuous agitation. They are in business for business's sake, Seneca, they seek business only for busyness. It is not that they want to be on the go so much as that they cannot keep still, no more nor less than a stone that has started falling, and that does not stop until it comes to rest. Occupation is to a certain manner of people a mark of ability and dignity. Their mind seeks its repose and movement, like children in the cradle. They may be said to be as serviceable to their friends as they are importunate to themselves. No one distributes his money to others. Everyone distributes his time and his life on them. There is nothing of which we are so prodigal as of the only things in which avarice would be useful to us and laudable. I take a wholly different attitude. I keep myself to myself, and commonly desire mildly what I desire, and desire little. Occupy and busy myself likewise, rarely and tranquilly. Whatever they desire and take in hand, they do with all their will and vehemence. There are so many bad spots that, for greater safety, we must slide over this world a bit lightly and on the surface. We must glide over it, not break through into it. Even sensual pleasure is painful in its depth. Treacherous ashes hide the fires through which you stride. Chorus. Messieurs of Bordeaux elected me mayor of their city when I was far from France and still farther from such a thought. I excused myself, but I was informed that I was wrong, since the king's command also figured in the matter. It is an office that must appear all the handsomer for this, that it has no remuneration or gain other than the honor of its execution. The term is 2 years, but it can be extended by a second election, which happens very rarely. This was done in my case, and had been done only twice before, some years earlier to Monsieur de Lansac, and recently to Monsieur de Biron, Marshal of France, to whose place I succeeded, and I left mine to Monsieur de Montaigne, also Marshal of France, proud of such noble company, each a good minister in peace and war. Virgil. Fortune willed to have a hand in my promotion by this particular circumstance that she put in of her own, not wholly vain, for Alexander disdained the Corinthian ambassadors who were offering him citizenship in their city, but when they came to tell him that Bacchus and Hercules were also on that list, he thanked them graciously for their offer. On my arrival, I deciphered myself to them faithfully and conscientiously, exactly such as I feel myself to be, without memory, without vigilance, without experience, without vigor, also without hate, without ambition, without avarice, and without violence, so that they should be informed and instructed about what they were to expect of my service. And because their knowledge of my late father had alone incited them to this, and their honor for his memory, I added very clearly that I should be very sorry if anything whatsoever were to weigh so heavily on my will as their affairs in their city had formerly done on his while he was administering it in the same spot to which they had called me. I remembered in my boyhood having seen him, old, his soul cruelly agitated by this public turmoil, forgetting the sweet air of his home, to which the weakness of years had attached him long since, and his household and his health, and truly heedless of his life, which he nearly lost in this, engaged for them in long and painful journeys. He was like that, and this disposition in him sprang from a great goodness of nature. There was never a more kindly and public spirited soul. This course which I commend in others, I do not love to follow, and I am not without excuse. He had heard it said that we must forget ourselves for our neighbor, that the individual is not to be considered at all in comparison with the general. Most of the rules and precepts of the world take this course of pushing us out of ourselves and driving us into the marketplace for the benefit of public society. They thought to achieve a fine result by diverting and distracting us from ourselves, assuming that we were attached to ourselves only too much and by too natural a bond, and they have spared no words to that end. For it is not new for the sages to preach things as they serve, not as they are. Truth has its inconveniences, disadvantages, and incompatibilities with us. We must often be deceived that we may not deceive others, and our eyes sealed, our understanding stunned, in order to redress and amend them. For it is the ignorant who judge, and they must frequently be deceived, lest they err. Quintilian. When they order us to love 3, 4, 50 degrees of things before ourselves, they imitate the technique of the archers who, to hit the mark, take aim a great distance above the target. To straighten a bent stick, you bend it back the other way. I think that in the temple of Pallas, as we see in all other religions, there were apparent mysteries to be shown to the people, and other mysteries more secret and high to be shown only to those who were initiated. It is likely that among the latter is to be found the true point of the friendship that each man owes to himself, not a false friendship that makes us embrace glory, learning, riches, and such things with paramount and immoderate affection as members of our being, nor an overindulgent and undiscriminating friendship, in which it happens as we see with ivy that it decays and ruins the wall it clings to, but a salutary and well regulated friendship, useful and pleasant alike. He who knows its duties and practices them, he is truly of the cabinet of the Muses. He has attained the summit of human wisdom and of our happiness. This man, knowing exactly what he owes to himself, finds it in his part that he is to apply to himself his experience of other men and of the world, and, in order to do so, contribute to public society the duties and services within his province. He who lives not at all unto others hardly lives unto himself. He who is a friend to himself know that that man is a friend to all. Seneca. The main responsibility of each of us is in his own conduct, and that is what we are here for. Just as anyone who should forget to live a good and saintly life and think he is quit of his duty by guiding and training others to do so would be a fool. Even so, he who abandons healthy and gay living of his own to serve others thereby takes, to my taste, a bad and unnatural course. I do not want a man to refuse to the charges he takes on attention, steps, words, and sweat and blood if need be. To die for what is dear, country or friends, I do not fear. Of course. But this is by way of loan and accidentally, the mind holding itself ever in repose and in health, not without action, but without vexation, without passion. Simply to act costs it so little that it is acting even in sleep, but it must be set in motion with discretion, for the body receives the loads that are placed on it exactly according as they are. The mind often extends them and makes them heavier to its cost, giving them the measurements it sees fit. We do like things with different degrees of effort and tension of will. The one goes very well without the other. For how many people risk themselves every day in the wars which are no concern to them, and press forward to the dangers of battles, the loss of which will not trouble their next night's sleep. This man in his own house, outside of this danger which he would not have dared to face, is more passionate about the outcome of this war and more worked up in his soul about it than the soldier who is spending his blood and his life in it. I have been able to take part in public office without departing one nail's breadth for myself, and to give myself to others without taking myself for myself. This fierceness and violence of desire hinders more than it serves the performance of what we undertake, fills us with impatience toward things that come out contrary or late, and with bitterness and suspicion toward the people we do with. We never conduct well the thing that possesses and conducts us. Passion handles all things ill. Statius. He who employs in it only his judgment and skill proceeds more gaily. He faints, he bends, he postpones entirely at his ease, according to the need of the occasion. He misses the target without torment or affliction, and remains intact and ready for a new undertaking. He always walks bridle in hand, and the man who is intoxicated with a violent and tyrannical intensity of purpose, we see of necessity much imprudence and injustice. The impetuosity of his desire carries him away. These are reckless movements, and, unless fortune lends them a great hand, of little fruit. Philosophy wills that in chastising injuries received, we keep anger out of it, not so that the vengeance may be less, but on the contrary, so that it may be all the better dealt out and heavier. Which purposes, so philosophy thinks, this impetuosity hinders. Not only does anger confuse, but of itself it also tires the arms of those who chastise. That fire benumbs and consumes their strength, as in precipitancy. More haste, less speed. Quintus Critias. Haste trips itself up, hobbles and stops itself. Speed gets itself tangled up. Seneca. For example, according to what I see by ordinary experience, avarice has no greater impediment than itself. The more tense and vigorous it is, the less fertile it is. Commonly, it catches riches more promptly when masked with an image of liberality. A friend of mine, a gentleman and a very fine man, nearly drove himself out of his mind by too passionate an attention and devotion to the affairs of a prince, his master, and that master thus betrayed himself to me, that he sees the gravity of accidents like anyone else, but in those who have no remedy, he at once makes up his mind to bear them, and the others, after making the necessary provisions, which he can do promptly thanks to his quick-wittedness, he composedly awaits what may ensue. In truth, I have seen him at work, maintaining a great nonchalance and freedom in his action countenance throughout very great and thorny affairs. I find him greater and more capable in bad fortune than in good. His losses are more glorious to him than his victories, and his grief than his triumph. Consider that even in actions which are vain and frivolous, in chess, tennis, and the like, this fierce and ardent involvement of an impetuous desire instantly casts the mind and limbs into thoughtlessness and disorder. We daze and hamper ourselves. He who bears himself more moderately toward winning and losing is always self possessed. The less he becomes excited and impassioned about the game, the more advantageously and surely he plays it. Moreover, we impede the mind's grasp and grip by giving it so many things to seize. Some must be simply presented to it, others attached to it, others incorporated into it. It can see and feel all things, but it should feed only on itself, and should be instructed about what properly concerns it, and what is properly of its own possession and its own substance. The laws of nature teach us what we rightly need, and the sages tell us that according to nature no one is indigent, and that everyone is so according to opinion. They distinguish subtly between the desires that come from her and those that come from the disorder of our imagination. In this way, those whose limits we can see are hers, those that flee before us and whose end we cannot reach are ours. Poverty of goods is easy to cure, poverty of soul impossible. For if what is enough for man could be enough, it were enough. But since it is not, how can I suppose that any wealth of my soul could satisfy? Lucilius, quoted by Nonius ourselves. Socrates, seeing a great quantity of riches, jewels, and costly articles carried in pomp through his city, said, "How many things I do not desire." Metrodorus lived on 12 ounces a day, Epicurus on less. Patrocles slept in winter with the sheep, in summer in the cloisters of the churches. Nature supplies what it demands. Seneca. Cleanthes lived by his hands and boasted that Cleanthes, if he wanted, could feed still another Cleanthes. If what nature flatly and originally demands of us for the preservation of our being is too little, as indeed there is no better way of expressing how little that is and how cheaply our life can be maintained than by this consideration that it is so little as to escape the grasp and shock of fortune by its very littleness. Then let us grant ourselves something further. Let us also call the habits and condition of each of us nature. Let us rate and treat ourselves according to this measure. Let us stretch our appurtenances and our accounts that far. For in going thus far, we certainly seem to me to have some justification. Habit is a second nature, and no less powerful. What my habit lacks, I hold that I lack, and I would almost as soon be deprived of life as to have it reduced and cut down very far from the state in which I have lived it for so long. I am no longer headed for any great change or inclined to plunge into a new and untried way of life, not even a better one. It is too late to become other than I am, and as I would be sorry about any great good fortune that might now fall into my hands, because it would not come at a time when I could enjoy it. What good are fortune's gifts if I'm denied their use? Force. So likewise I would complain of any inward acquisition. It is almost better never to become a good man than so late, or an expert in living when one has no more life. I, who am on my way out, would readily resign to anyone who came along what wisdom I am learning for dealing with the world mustered after dinner. I have no use for a good thing of which I can make no use. What good is knowledge to a man who no longer has a head? It is an insult and unkindness of fortune to offer us presents which fill us with a just resentment that they failed us in their season. Guide me no more, I can go no more. Of all the parts that ability has, patience is enough for us. Give the capacity of an excellent treble to a singer who has rotten lungs, and eloquence to a hermit relegated to the deserts of Arabia. We need no art for a fall. The end is found of itself at the conclusion of every task. My world is done for. My form is emptied. I belong entirely to the past. I am bound to recognize it and conform my departure to it. I want to mention this as an example that the recent eclipsing of 10 days by the Pope has so taken me aback that I cannot feel comfortable with it. I belong to the years in which we reckon differently. Such an ancient and long practice claims me and calls me back to it. I am constrained to be a bit of a heretic on that point, incapable of innovation, even when it is corrective. My imagination, in spite of me, is always casting itself 10 days forward or back and muttering in my ears. This rule concerns those who are yet to be. If health itself, sweet as it is, happens to revisit me by fits and starts, it is rather in order to make me regret it than to return into my possession. I no longer have anywhere to harbor it. Time is forsaking me. Without it, nothing can be possessed. Oh, what little account I should make of those great elective dignities I see in the world, which are given only to men ready to depart, in which people do not consider so much how well the duties will be discharged as how briefly they will be discharged. Right from their entry, people look to their exit. In short, here I am in the act of finishing up this man, not of making another out of him. By long usage, this form of mine has turned into substance, and fortune into nature. So I say that every one of us feeble creatures is excusable for considering as his own what is comprised under this measure. But it is also true that beyond these limits there is nothing left but confusion. This is the broadest extent that we can grant to our claims. The more we amplify our need and our possession, the more we involve ourselves in the blows of fortune and adversity. The range of our desires should be circumscribed and restrained to a narrow limit of the nearest and most contiguous good things, and, moreover, their course should be directed not in a straight line that ends up elsewhere, but in a circle whose two extremities by a short sweep meet and terminate in ourselves. Actions that are performed without this reflexive movement, I mean, a searching and genuine reflexive movement, the actions, for example, of the avaricious, the ambitious, and so many others who run in a straight line, whose course carries them ever forward, are erroneous and diseased actions. Most of our occupations are little comedy, The whole world plays a part. Petronius, we must play our part duly, but as the part of a borrowed character. Of the mask and appearance we must not make a real essence, nor of what is foreign, what is our very own. We cannot distinguish the skin from the shirt. It is enough to make up our face without making up our heart. I see some who transform and transubstantiate themselves into as many new shapes and new beings as they undertake jobs, who are prelates to their very liver and intestines, and drag their position with them even into their privy. I cannot teach them to distinguish the tips of the hat that are for them from those that are for their office, or their retinue, or their mule. They give themselves up so much to their fortune that they even unlearn their natures. Quintus Curtius. They swell and inflate their soul and their natural speech to the height of their magisterial seat. The mayor and Montaigne have always been two, with a very clear separation. For all of being a lawyer and a financier, we must not ignore the knavery there is in such callings. An honest man is not accountable for the vice or stupidity of his trade, and should not therefore refuse to practice it. It is the custom of his country, and there is profit in it. We must live in the world and make the most of it, such as we find it. But the judgment of an emperor should be above his imperial power, and see and consider it as an extraneous accident. And he should know how to find pleasure in himself apart, and to reveal himself like any Jack or Peter, least to himself. I do not know how to involve myself so deeply and so entirely. When my will gives me over to one party, it is not with so violent an obligation that my understanding is infected by it. In the present broils of the state, my own interest has not made me blind to either the laudable qualities in our adversaries or those that are reproachable in the men I have followed. People adore everything that is on their side. As for me, I do not even excuse most of the things that I see on mine. A good work does not lose its grace for pleading against my cause. Except for the knot of controversy, I have maintained my equanimity and pure indifference. And beyond the necessities of war, I bear no special hatred, for which I am pleased with myself, inasmuch as I see men commonly fail in the opposite direction. Let him make use of passion who cannot make use of reason. Cicero. Those who prolong their anger and hatred beyond the affairs in question, as most men do, show that it comes from another part of them and from a personal cause. Just as a man who, cured of an ulcer, still has his fever, shows that it had another, more hidden origin. The fact is that they have no hatred for the cause in general, and so far as it hurts the interest of all and of the state, they resent it only in that it galls them in private. That is why they are stung by it with a personal passion, and beyond justice and public reason. For they do not all blame the terms as a whole, so much as they each blamed those that affected them individually. Livy. I want the advantage to be for us, but I do not fly into a frenzy if it is not. I adhere firmly to the healthiest of the parties, but I do not seek to be noted as especially hostile to the others and beyond the bounds of the general reason. I condemn extraordinarily this bad form of arguing. He is of the League, for he admires the grace of Monsieur de Guise. The activity of the King of Navarre amazes him. He is a Huguenot. He finds this to criticize in the King's morals. He is seditious in his art. I did not concede even to the magistrate that he was right to condemn a book for having placed a heretic among the best poets of this century. Should we not dare say of a thief that he has a fine leg? And if she is a whore, must she also necessarily have bad breath? In wiser ages, did they revoke the proud title of Capitolinus, which they had previously given to Marcus Manlius, as the preserver of public religion and liberty? Did they smother the memory of his liberality and his feats of arms and the military rewards accorded to his valor, because he afterward aspired to kingship to the prejudice of his country's laws? If they have formed a hatred for an advocate, the next day in their view he becomes ineloquent. I have elsewhere touched on the zeal that impels good men into similar faults. For my part, I can perfectly well say, he does this wickedly and that virtuously. Likewise in predictions or in the unfavorable outcome of affairs, they want everyone to be blind and stupid in his own cause, and our conviction and judgment to serve, not the truth, but the aim of our desire. I should rather err toward the other extreme. So much do I fear being suborned by my desire. Besides, I am somewhat tenderly distrustful of the things I wish for. I have in my time seen wonders in the undiscerning and prodigious ease with which peoples let their belief and hope be led and manipulated in whatever way has pleased and served their leaders, passing over 100 mistakes one on top of the other, passing over phantasms and dreams. I am no longer amazed at those who are hoodwinked by the monkey tricks of Apollonius and Mahomet. Their sense and understanding is entirely smothered in their passion. Their discernment is left no other choice than the one that smiles upon them and comforts their cause. I had observed this to a supreme degree in the first of our feverish factions. This other, which has been born since, in imitating it, surpasses it. Wherefore I am led to believe that this is a characteristic inseparable from popular errors. After the first one that starts out, the others push each other forward, following the wind like waves. The man is not a part of the body if he can renounce it, if he does not wander along with the common movement. But truly we wrong the just sides when we want to assist them with fraud. I have always opposed that practice. It has effect only with sickly heads. With sane ones, there are always ways that are surer, as well as more honest, for keeping up their courage and accounting for adverse events. Heaven has not seen, and will never again see, so grave a discord as that between Caesar and Pompey. However, I seem to recognize in those noble souls a great moderation toward one another. It was a rivalry in honor and authority which did not carry them away into furious and undiscerning hatred, a rivalry without malignity and without detraction. In their bitterest exploits, I discover some remnant of respect and goodwill, and thus I judge that if it had been possible, each of them would have wished to do his business without the ruin of his fellow rather than with his ruin. How differently it goes with Marius and Sulla. Make a note of it. We must not rush frantically after our passions and interests, just as when I was young I opposed the progress of love which I felt advancing too far upon me, and took care that it should not be so pleasing to me as in the end to overpower me and hold me completely at its mercy. So I do the same on all other occasions, where my will is seized with too strong an appetite. I lean in the opposite direction from its inclination, as I see it plunging in and getting drunk with its own wine. I avoid feeding its pleasure to such an extent that I can no longer regain control of it without cruel loss. The souls that, through stupidity, see things only by half, enjoy this good fortune, that harmful things hurt them less. It is a spiritual leprosy that has some appearance of health, and such health as philosophy does not scorn at all. But yet it is not right to call it wisdom, as we often do. And in this manner, someone in antiquity made fun of Diogenes, who, in the depth of winter, stark naked, was embracing a snow figure as a test of his endurance. Coming upon him in that posture, this man said to him, "Are you very cold now?" "Not at all," answered Diogenes. Then the other went on, "What difficult and exemplary thing do you think you are doing by remaining there? To measure the fortitude, we must necessarily know the suffering, but the souls that will have to see adversities and the injuries of fortune in all their depth and sharpness, that will have to weigh them and taste them according to their natural bitterness and their gravity. Let them employ their art to keep from entering into their causes, and let them turn aside from the approaches that lead to them." What did King Clovis do? He paid liberally for the beautiful, rich vessel that had been offered to him, but because it was singularly fragile, he immediately broke it himself to remove early such an easy occasion for anger against his servants. In like manner, I have deliberately avoided having my affairs mixed up with others, and have not sought to have my property contiguous with that of my relations and of those with whom I am to be joined by close friendship, whence ordinarily arise grounds for estrangement and dissension. I used to be fond of games of chance with cards and dice. I gave them up long ago for this reason only, that however good a face I put on my losses, I did not fail to feel stung by them within. A man of honor who must take the giving of the lie or an affront to heart, who is not one to take a silly excuse as payment and consolation for his loss, should avoid letting doubtful affairs and contentious altercations run their course. I shun gloomy dispositions and surly men like those with the plague. and in subjects that I cannot discuss disinterestedly and dispassionately. I do not meddle unless duty forces me to. It is better for them not to begin than to desist. Seneca. The safest way, then, is to be prepared before the occasions. I know well that some wise men have taken another way, and have not feared to grapple and engage themselves to the quick with many subjects. Those men are sure of their strength, under which they take cover in all kinds of adverse defense, making their power of endurance wrestle with the misfortunes. As a great rock that juts out into the vast ocean, open to the wild winds, exposed to the sea's commotion, endures the entire power and threats of sky and deep, standing unmoved. Virgil. Let us not tackle these examples. We would not come up to them. These men obstinately determined to see resolutely and without perturbation the ruin of their country, which possessed and commanded their entire will. For our common souls, there is too much effort and harshness in that. Cato therefore abandoned the noblest life that ever was. We little men must flee the storm from further away. We must try to avoid feeling it, not try to endure it, and dodge the blows we cannot parry. Zeno, seeing Charmides, a young man he loved, come over to sit beside him, promptly got up, and when Cleanthes asked him the reason, he said, I understand that the doctors principally prescribe rest and forbid excitement for all kinds of tumors. Socrates does not say, do not surrender to the charms of beauty, withstand it, make an effort to oppose it, flee from it, he says, run from the sight of it, and from meeting it, as from potent poison that darts and strikes from afar. And his good disciple, imagining or recounting, but in my opinion, recounting rather than imagining, the rare perfections of the great Cyrus, makes him mistrustful of his powers to withstand the charms of the divine beauty of the illustrious Panthea, his captive, and has him commit the visiting and guarding of her to another who had less liberty than he. And the Holy Ghost, in like manner, lead us not into temptation. We do not pray that our reason may not be combated and overcome by concupiscence, but that it may not even be tested by it, that we may not be brought into a state where we even have to suffer the approaches, solicitations, and temptations of sin. And we supplicate our Lord to keep our conscience tranquil, fully and perfectly delivered from dealing with evil. Those who say that they have got the better of their vindictive passion or of some other kind of painful passion often tell the truth as things are, but not as they were. They speak to us when the causes of their error have been fostered and developed by themselves. But go back further. Call these causes back to their beginning. There you will take them unprovided. Do they expect their fault to be lesser for being older, and the sequel of an unjust beginning to be just? He who desires the good of his country as I do, without getting ulcers and growing thin over it, will be unhappy, but not stunned, to see it threatened either with ruin or with conditions of survival no less ruinous. Poor vessel, which the waves, the winds, and the pilot pull about with such contrary purposes. In such diverse ways do pilot winds and waves impel the cannon. He who does not gape after the favor of princes as a thing he cannot do without is not much stung by the coolness of their reception and countenance, but by the inconstancy of their will. He who does not brood over his children or his honors with a slavish fondness manages to live comfortably after their loss. He who does good chiefly for his own satisfaction is not much upset by seeing men judge his actions contrary to his merit. A quarter of an ounce of patience is remedy enough against such annoyances. I find myself well off with this recipe, buying myself off at the beginning as cheaply as I can, and I feel that by means of it I have escaped much travail and many difficulties. With very little effort, I arrest the first movement of my emotions and abandon the subject that is beginning to weigh on me before it carries me away. He who does not arrest the start has no chance to arrest the course. He who cannot close the door to emotions will not drive them out once they are in. He who cannot get the better of the beginning will not get the better of the end, nor will he withstand their fall who has been unable to withstand their first stirring. For they drive themselves on by themselves when once reason is abandoned, and weakness is self-indulgent and is carried out to sea without knowing it, and finds no place to stand still. Cicero. I feel in time the little winds that come to test me out and murmur within me, forerunners of the storm. The mind is shaken long before it is overpowered. Seneca. As when the rising winds murmur, caught in some wooded glen, then roll roaring along, forecasting gales for sailors. How many times have I done myself a very evident injustice to avert the hazard of receiving an even worse one from the judges, after an age of vexations, of vile and dirty practices, more hostile to my nature than the rack and the flames. It is proper to shun lawsuits as much as is permissible, and perhaps even a little more than is permissible. For it is not only generous, but sometimes even profitable, to come down a little from our rights. Cicero. If we were really wise, we should rejoice and boast, like the young man of a great family whom I heard one day informing everyone with naive delight that his mother had just lost her lawsuit as if it were her cough, her fever, or something else troublesome to keep. Even the favors that fortune might have given me by my kinship or acquaintance with those who have sovereign authority in those things, I have very conscientiously and insistently avoided using to the prejudice of others to raise my rights above their right value. In short, I have managed so well by my daily efforts, fortunately, may I say, that here I am still a virgin of lawsuits, which have not failed to offer themselves to my service many times with a very just title, if I had wanted to listen to them, and virgin of quarrels. I shall soon have spent a long life without serious offense received or given, and without having heard anything worse than my name, a rare favor of heaven. Our greatest agitations have ridiculous springs and causes. what a disaster our last Duke of Burgundy incurred because of a quarrel about a cartload of sheepskins. And was not the engraving of his seal the first and principal cause of the most horrible upheaval that this machine has ever suffered? For Pompey and Caesar are only the offshoots and the sequel of the other two. And I have seen in my time the wisest heads in this kingdom assembled with great ceremony and public expense for treaties and accords, of which the real decision, meanwhile, depended in all sovereignty on the talk in the lady's boudoir and the inclination of some little woman. The poets understood this well, who put Greece and Asia to fire and sword for an apple. See why that man goes off to risk his honor and his life with his sword and dagger. Let him tell you whence comes the source of this quarrel. He cannot do so without blushing, so frivolous is the occasion of it. At the beginning, only a little reflection is needed, but once you are embarked, all the ropes start pulling. Then you need great resources, much more difficult and important. How much easier it is not to go into it than to get out of it. Now, we should proceed in the opposite way from the reed, which on first shooting up produces a long, straight stem, but afterward, as if it had grown languid and out of breath, comes to form frequent thick knots, like so many pauses, which show that it no longer has this first vigor and constancy. We must rather begin gently and coolly and save our breath and our vigorous efforts for the thick and culmination of the business. We guide affairs at their beginnings and hold them at our mercy, but afterward, when they are underway, it is they that guide us and carry us away, and we have to follow them. Yet this is not to say that this plan has relieved me of all difficulty, and that I have not often had trouble curbing and bridling my passions. They are not always to be governed according to the importance of the occasion, and even their beginnings are often sharp and violent. At all events, a fine saving and some profit may be derived from this plan, except for those who, in well-doing, are not content with any profit if no reputation is involved. For in truth, such an action is valued only by each man in himself. You are happier for it, but not more esteemed, if you have reformed before joining in the dance and before the matter was in view. At the same time, however, not only in this but in all other duties in life, the road of those who aim at honor is very different from the one followed by those whose goal is order and reason. I find some who enter the lists heedlessly and furiously and show up in the charge. Pluto says that those who, through the vice of false shame, are soft and easy in granting whatever they are asked, are afterward easy in failing their word and recanting. By the same token, he who enters a quarrel lightly is apt to get out of it just as lightly. The same difficulty that keeps me from cutting into it would spur me on when I was once stirred up and heated. It is a bad habit. Once you are in it, you must go through with it or burst. Undertake softly, says Bias, but pursue hotly. For want of prudence, men fall back into want of courage, which is still less tolerable. Most of the settlements of our quarrels nowadays are shameful and dishonest. We seek only to save appearances, and meanwhile betray and disavow our true intentions. We plaster over the fact. We know how we have said it and in what sense, and those present know it, and our friends, whom we wanted to have feel in our advantage. It is at the expense of our frankness and of the honor of our courage that we disown our thought and seek rabbit holes in falsehood in order to come to an agreement. We give ourselves the lie to save the lie we have given to someone else. You must not consider whether your action or your word may have another interpretation. It is your true and sincere interpretation that you must henceforth maintain, whatever it costs you. Your virtue and your conscience are addressed. These are not parts to put behind a mask. Let us leave these vile means and expedients to chicanery of the palace of justice. The excuses and reparations that I see made every day to purge our indiscretion seem to me uglier than indiscretion itself. It would be better to offend your adversary once more than to offend yourself by making such amends to him. You have defied him when you were moved with anger, and you are going to appease and flatter him when you are in a more sober and affable mood. Thus you are giving way further than you have advanced. I do not consider anything a gentleman can say as vicious as the unsaying of it seems to me shameful, when it is an unsaying that is wrenched from him by authority, inasmuch as stubbornness is more excusable in him than pusillanimity. Passions are as easy for me to avoid as they are hard for me to moderate. They are more easily torn from the mind than checked. Seneca. He who cannot attain that noble impassibility of the Stoics, let him take refuge in the bosom of this plebeian stupidity of mine. What those men did by virtue, I train myself to do by disposition. The middle region harbors the tempest. The two extremes, philosophers and rustics, concur in tranquility and happiness. Happy who knows the origin of things, and who can scorn inexorable fate and fear, and greedy Acheron's howls of hate. Happy also is he who knows the woodland clan, the nymphs and old Sylvanus, and the great god Pan. Virgil. All things are weak and tender at birth, therefore we must have our eyes open to the beginnings. For as then, when a thing is little, we do not discover its danger, so when it is grown, we no longer discover the remedy for it. I would have found it harder to digest the million frustrations that I would have encountered every day in an ambitious career than I have found it to arrest the natural inclination that bore me to it. I shrink with rightful dread from raising my conspicuous head. Horace. All public actions are subject to uncertain and diverse interpretations, for too many heads judge them. Some say about this municipal service of mine, I am glad to say a word about it, not that it is worth it, but to serve as an example of my conduct in such things, that when I went about it like a man who exerts himself too weakly and with a languishing zeal, and they are not at all far from having a case, I try to keep my soul and my thoughts in repose, always calm by nature, now even more so with age. Q. Cicero. And if they sometimes veer under some rough and penetrating attack, it is in truth without my consent. From this natural languor, however, one ought not to derive any proof of impotence, for lack of assiduity and lack of sense are two different things, and still less of insensibility and ingratitude toward the people of Bordeaux, who did everything in their power to gratify me, both before they knew me and after, and did much more for me by giving me an office than by giving it to me in the first place. I wish them all possible good, and certainly, had an occasion arisen, there is nothing I would have spared for their service. I bestirred myself for them just as I do for myself. They are good people, warlike and idealistic, yet capable of obedience and discipline, and of serving some good purpose if they are well guided. People also say that my administration passed without a mark or a trace. That's a good one. They accuse me of inactivity in a time when almost everyone was convicted of doing too much. I have a lively way of acting wherever my will carries me along, but this eagerness is an enemy to perseverance. If anyone wants to use me according to my nature, let him give me tasks in which vigor and freedom are needed, tasks that require direct, brief, and even hazardous conduct. In those I can do something. If it has to be long, subtle, laborious, artificial, and torturous, he would do better to apply to someone else. Not all important offices are difficult. I was prepared to work myself a bit more roughly if there had been any great need of it, for it is in my power to do something more than I do or than I like to do. I do not leave undone, as far as I know, any action that duty genuinely required of me. I easily forgot those that ambition mixes up with duty and covers with its name. Those are the ones that most often fill the eyes and ears and satisfy men. Not the thing, but the appearance pays them. If they hear no noise, it seems to them that we are asleep. My humors are opposite of noisy humors. I could easily check a disturbance without being disturbed, and punish a disorder without losing a temper. Do I need anger and inflammation? I borrow it and wear it as a mask. My behavior is mild, rather tame than fierce. I do not condemn a magistrate who sleeps, provided that those who are under his care are also asleep. The laws sleep too. For my part, I commend a gliding, obscure, and quiet life, neither groveling and abject, nor overbearing. Cicero. My fortune so wills it. I was born to a family that, from way back, has flowed along without glamour, without tumult, a family ambitious above all for integrity. Men of our time are so formed for agitation and ostentation that goodness, moderation, equability, constancy, and such quiet and obscure qualities are no longer felt. Rough bodies are felt, smooth ones are handled imperceptibly. Sickness is felt, health little or not at all, nor do we feel the things that charm us compared with those that harm us. It is acting for our private reputation and profit, not for the good. To put off and do in the public square what we can do in the council chamber, and at high noon what we could have done the night before, and to be jealous to do ourselves what our colleague does as well. Thus, some surgeons of Greece used to perform the operations of their art on platforms in the sight of passers by, in order to acquire a greater practice and clientele. They think that good rules can be heard only to the sound of trumpets. Ambition is not a vice for little fellows and for undertakings such as ours. Someone said to Alexander, "Your father will leave you a great dominion, easy and peaceful." That boy was envious of his father's victories and of the justice of his government. He would not have wanted to enjoy the empire of the world softly and peacefully. Alcibiades, in Plato, prefers to die supremely young, handsome, rich, noble, learned, rather than to stand still in that condition. This malady is perhaps excusable in so strong and full a soul. When these dwarfish and puny soulettes behave like vain baboons and think to spread their name for having rightly judged an affair or continued the order of the guards at a city gate, the more they hope to raise their head, the more they show their tail. These minute good works have neither body nor life. They vanish at the first telling and travel only from one street corner to the next. Entertain your son and your valet with them boldly, like that ancient, who having no other auditor of his praises or witness of his valor, boasted to his chambermaid, exclaiming, "O Perete, what a gallant and capable man you have for a master!" Entertain yourself with them, if worst comes to worst, like a counselor of my acquaintance who, after disgorging a boatload of paragraphs with extreme effort and equal ineptitude, retired from the council chamber to the palace urinal, where he was heard muttering very conscientiously between his teeth, "Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory." Psalms. If he cannot get it from anyone else, let him pay himself out of his own purse. Renown does not prostitute itself at so cheap a rate. The rare and exemplary actions to which it is due would not endure the company of that innumerable crowd of petty everyday actions. Marble will exalt your titles as much as you please for having had a piece of wall patched up or a public gutter cleaned out, but men who have sense will not. Reputation does not follow every good deed if difficulty and strangeness are not joined to it, nor indeed is even esteem to every action that is not born of virtue, according to the Stoics, and they do not want even recognition accorded to a man who through temperance abstains from a blear-eyed old woman. Those who have acknowledged the admirable qualities of Scipio Africanus refuse him the glory that Venetius accords him for having abstained from taking gifts, as a glory belonging not so much to him as to his whole age. We have the pleasures suitable to our lot. Let us not usurp those of greatness. Ours are more natural and all the more solid and sure for being humbler. Since we will not do so out of conscience, at least out of ambition, let us reject ambition. Let us disdain this base and beggarly hunger for renown and honor, which makes us grovel for it before all sorts of people. What is that praise that may be bought in the marketplace? Cicero. Abjectly, and at no matter how vile a price, it is dishonor to be so honored. Let us learn to be no more avid of glory than we are capable of it. To be puffed up at every useful and harmless action is for people with whom these are extraordinary and rare. They want to put them at the price they cost them. In proportion as a good deed is more brilliant, I deduct from its goodness the suspicion I have that it was performed more to be brilliant than to be good. Put on display, it is half sold. those actions have much more grace which escape from the hand of the workman nonchalantly and noiselessly, and which some worthy man later picks out and lifts back out of obscurity to push them into the light for their own sake. To me, indeed, all things seem more praiseworthy by which are done without ostentation and without public witness. Cicero says the most vainglorious man in the world. I had nothing to do but conserve and endure, which are noiseless and imperceptible acts. Innovation has great luster, but it is forbidden in these times, when we are hard pressed and have to defend ourselves mainly against innovations. Abstention from doing is often as noble as doing, but it is less open to the light, and the little that I am worth is almost all on that side. In short, the occasions in my term of office were suited to my disposition, for which I am very grateful to them. Is there anyone who wants to be sick in order to see his doctor at work? And shouldn't we whip any doctor who would wish us the plague in order to put his art into practice? I have not had that iniquitous and rather common disposition of wanting the trouble and sickness of the affairs of this city to exalt and honor my government. I heartily lent a soldier to make them easy and light. Anyone who will not be grateful to me for the order, the gentle and mute tranquillity that accompanied my administration, at least cannot deprive me of the share of it that belongs to me by right of my good fortune. And I am so made that I like as well to be lucky as wise, and to owe my successes purely to the grace of God as to the effect of my own action. I have published elaborately enough to the world my inadequacy in such public management. I have something still worse than inadequacy, that I hardly mind it, and hardly try to cure it. In view of the course of life that I have designed for myself, I did not satisfy myself either in this undertaking, but I accomplished about what I had promised myself, and far surpassed what I had promised those whom I had to deal with. For I am apt to promise a little less than what I can do and what I hope to deliver. I am sure I have left no cause for offense or hatred. As for leaving regret and desire, at the very least I know this well, that I did not greatly care about that. My trust in such a monster place, ignore the meaning of the sea's smooth face, the quiet waves,